It's time we talked about a serious problem in Monster Hunter Wilds. The problem? A lack of Gogmazios. There's so many monsters in so little time. So much space in this game. It's honestly a big crime. Looking at all of these environments and all these cool places, we have a serious lack of seriously cool faces. For Wilds, bring back the old monsters who've been exiled, the ones who'd kill you as they'd flaunt their gorgeousness, like a dragon made of tar whose back happens to hold the first dragon, a tar, and also wings. Yes, he can fly into the sky and then fire laser beams that'll make you all die. Unless you set up the demolisher and proceed to bombard, you'll get covered in oil, feathered and tarred. Without further ado, and with plenty of time to savor it, let's talk about a monster who's surely a fan favorite. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, Monster Hunter Wilds is coming up fast and hard, just the way I like it. And as usual, before we get going anywhere, a quick disclaimer that I am nearly fully blind for Monster Hunter Wilds, spoiler-free from everything except for the very first initial reveal trailer. And I guess some sounds from listening to Josh play the beta without any actual visuals. But the point is, don't worry, my reactions to new stuff are completely preserved. This series is just sort of my way of getting out all my pent-up excitement and hype about the beginning of the goddamn 6th generation of Monster Hunter. On the note of Gog, today I want to talk about a monster that I would love to see make a return in Monster Hunter Wilds, Gogmazios. This big, lovely tar-covered dragon is one of the most mysterious and eerie creatures that has ever been made in this series. And so today I will be lobbying for why I think he could come back, why I think he should come back, and anything extra fun I think could be done to maybe change his fight for modern Monster Hunter. First up then, as for why he could come back, obviously my actual knowledge is pretty much limited to the reveal trailer, but I also run all of the choices for the series past Josh, who is super on top of things, and his response about Gogmazios was, somewhat paraphrasing here, he's still a final boss, so it is unlikely in that sense, but if they do choose to bring back a returning final boss, he's probably the most likely right now for Wilds. Then he of course refused to elaborate even a little bit further when I asked, so I'll let you guys make of that what you will, as I assume it will mean something to the rest of you. Aside from that, tying it to things that I do know, Wilds is going to have absolutely massive, sprawling open areas for hunting in, and I've always said that I prefer big monsters when they still feel like actual normal sized monsters too, when they fight like actual monsters and are able to exist and maneuver around just standard existing maps especially. These special arena type fights are neat, but I find them very boring because you sit in one place for the entire hunt, and especially when you get to like proper siege fights, you end up spending more time and attention on maintaining like cannons or ballista than you do actually hitting the monster with your weapon more times than not. And while it can make for a cool set piece or a spectacle moment, and that first initial hunt experience is pretty much unmatched by regular monsters, the thing that makes Monster Hunter what it is for me is the variety of repetition long term. I think I fought Gosarag nearly 100 times in the first month after Monster Hunter Rise's existence, and while it is obviously an outlier because I specifically love Gosarag a hell of a lot, and I find the pacing and timing of his fight and attacks just extremely enjoyable to even just do on autopilot, but the reason that I even did that to begin with is because generally Monster Hunter fights are just so dynamic to the point that unless you are basically scripting it to the moment for like speedrunning purposes, the fight will just never go down the exact same way every time for the average person. And even then, speedrunners have runs that go off of their script because that's just how the game works. It's very fluid, it's malleable, it's dynamic, it reacts to your inputs, your positioning, but there's also just an element of randomness under it all too. And all of that is what helps make monsters, and honestly just Monster Hunter as a whole, feel extremely alive. Like the creatures actually have their own thoughts and existences outside of this one interaction with the hunter. This is something that I think Siege and Special Arena Monster quests lose somewhat quickly, because even just the simple fact that there aren't really zones for them to walk between removes a lot of that variance to me. I love monsters like Iceborne Fatalis, sure, but I'll always hold that Raging Brachydios is one of, if not the greatest Monster Hunter quests of all time, and while it does have a fair bit of scripting going on in it, it happens in the Guiding Lands in a proper open map. There is zone transferring, there's still a little bit of RNG even though it's mostly scripted, and I maybe gone a bit too far on this point, but I really just like when monsters are in the proper open larger maps opposed to their own arenas. It makes them feel more involved in the world as a whole, and I think Wilds is by far the Monster Hunter game with the largest individual arenas or zones for fighting monsters in, at least from the one trailer that I've seen. So if there was somewhere that it somehow made sense for a gigantic tar dragon to inhabit, I would love to see him just out and about on the map as a fight. I don't know, maybe like a volcano I guess would be the best choice. You can't really put him somewhere cold because the tar wouldn't be as easy to melt. You couldn't like put him in a desert, that doesn't really fit him, so I guess a volcano would probably be the best guess. Then we have the question of should Gogmazios come back? Well, he has only been out for one full generation, and you could argue that there are monsters more deserving of a returning spot purely on a time since they were last included basis. But Gogmazios is one of the most influential final bosses of the entire series, even if just for the fact that in conversation about Monster Hunter, people literally have replaced the word God with Gog, and it started as a joke because of him, and because of that just became a sort of standard part of the community's vocabulary. And that's sort of hilarious in itself, really, to me. But given his only appearance was in Thor Ultimate, that means a whole load of hunters have just never experienced him themselves, as the vast majority of the player base that exists for the Monster Hunter games now came with the 5th generation. They started with Monster Hunter World or Monster Hunter Rise, and hey, I've even heard of people getting into the main series after starting with Monster Hunter Stories 2, a spin-off. The last few years have been a massive boom in popularity for the series, and while it is fantastic for its own reasons, of course, it does also mean that there is just a gigantic section of the player base that has never interacted with the majority of the monster roster that the series has, only knowing what is either originally created for the 5th gen games or anything that has happened to return within them. And the interesting thing about that is that World and Rise have a fair amount of overlap in the monsters between them. World monsters and Rise, things that returned in both, like Zenogre or Nargacuga, so the actual list of monsters that these players have fought compared to what is in the series is surprisingly small, which means all old monsters are essentially new monsters for them the first time that they return in a new Monster Hunter game. This means there are a bunch of people who aren't in on the goddamn joke that need to be introduced to it as far as I'm concerned, but then even past that, from a concept of what returning monsters would make the largest impact on players who haven't seen them or heard of them before, and I think Gogmazios is right near the top of that list. He is unique, he is impressive, he is imposing. There is nothing like him in the series, and if he was implemented correctly, he could easily send shivers down the spine of anyone who sees him for the first time, and then doubly so when they actually see a creature just as large as he is, capable of goddamn flying actively as part of the fight. And then after realizing that, they see the pure death that he rains down from above, as if it wasn't enough that someone like that can easily take the high ground from you in an instant. All that said, how would I change him then? Visually, I would not change a thing, at least not conceptually, because in my mind, a modern graphics version of Gogmazios would just be absolutely nuts. First, I hope they give more accentuation to his little like glowing face on the bottom of his chin when he heats up. I know that is not his real face, but I love that he has like a glowing chin emoji tattoo essentially, and honestly, I'd probably get that as a tattoo myself too if, you know, I didn't want to sleep at night. Not that I do, insomnia aside, he is just visually incredible. From the chin face to the fact that he is just permanently covered in shifting, dripping oil, a sheet of tar covering his entire body that slowly just melts off of him and drips to the ground while he regenerates it actively when he's heated up. He uses the tar as a weapon as well. I don't even know if it's really purposeful or accidental, and he even has a unique status that he can apply to players with it. I love the unique statuses that the series has in general, so I'd be happy to see more of these return as well. And he has the first Dragonator in his back, which is something that might honestly have to change if he were brought back, because it's a very specific Dragonator, and the Dragonator in his back was a very specific thing to that one particular Gogmazios in 4 Ultimate, to show just how far back in time it was an issue to that area. Having the literal first Dragonator ever created just stuck and lodged in his back. Alternatively, they can make it so that he keeps the Dragonator, but make it even more prominent. Maybe give him a second Dragonator, or maybe give him a second phase where he pulls it out of himself and like goddamn Midra from Elden Ring and then wields the Dragonator as a sword against you. Okay, look, I know I go a little bit too far sometimes, but bear with me. For the most part, I do really like his fight as well. And aside from just updating some animations to be a little more fluid and less clunky, the main things that I'd like to see are just a bit more aerial shenanigans from him. The fact that he can fly is a marvel in itself, so seeing him use that more would be cool, especially if we fight him in the open world and we can use terrain or maybe even gliding with the mount monster to try and intercept him mid-air. Then also there's more shenanigans with the tar, perhaps almost making it overlap a bit more with stuff like webbed. Maybe he could even purposefully tar up the mount monster while you aren't riding it, which would then make the mount monster unrideable until you like maybe you have to clean it off. Maybe there's a button prompt. Could even get that like a context animation, make you stand there brushing it off for a couple of seconds, almost like the bleed debuff, forcing you to crouch, except instead of restricting players based movement, instead restricting access to the mount. A whole section of the game sort of functions, which I think could be a fun way of messing with unique parts of Wilds itself, especially if, as theorized, the second weapon that exists on the bird mount monster is something the hunter can actually swap between on hunts, because if you then have the bird be tarred and unusable, that could stop you from swapping your weapons, locking you into only having the currently drawn weapon until it ends. You could even add like unique interactions with this, like either water element weapons, washing it off easily if you attack towards your mount monster, or like fire fire weapons, burning it off, either whichever side you want to lean towards, making more sense to get rid of Tar. But I just like the idea of expanding the Tar's part in his fight as a whole, because the sort of heated mega beams and the physical attacks from his original fight would all still fit absolutely perfectly, in my opinion. So I just want to add in some like novel stuff like this and have the rest updated to modern animation standards, really more than anything else. That pretty much does it for today, then everyone. Just a discussion about the possibility of the return of Gogmazios, one of the greatest final bosses the Monster Hunter series has ever seen, and a monster high up on a lot of longtime players' lists of favorite monsters. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and of course, while I am missing a lot of the context here, if there's anything that you think either supports the idea of Gog returning, or instead does the opposite, feel free to discuss that in the comments down below, though know that I won't be looking at them personally due to my deathly allergy to spoilers. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.